The storm before the calm. The salty breeze of the Florida Keys carried a whisper of the approaching dawn, a gentle prelude to another day on the water. Tom Calloway, a man as weathered as the sea itself, stood at the edge of the dock, his boots worn and scuffed from decades of use. The sun had yet to peek over the horizon, leaving the world in a quiet violet glow. This was his favorite time of day, the moment before the world woke up, when the sea was his alone. Tom exhaled deeply, feeling the strain in his chest. The persistent rattle in his lungs had grown worse lately, a reminder that time waited for no man. He adjusted his old fisherman's cap, tugged his yellow coat tighter against the crisp morning air, and made his way toward his boat, the Lucky Catch. The boat had seen better days, its once bright paint now peeling, the name barely legible, but it was reliable. A lot like him. With the ease of a man who had performed the ritual thousands of times, Tom stepped onto the boat and began his routine, checking the engine, uncoiling ropes, and ensuring his fishing gear was ready. The sea was unpredictable, and even a seasoned fisherman like Tom knew that preparedness meant survival. The engine roared to life with a familiar sputter, and soon, the Lucky Catch glided away from the dock, heading toward deeper waters. The horizon was painted in streaks of lavender and gold, the gentle lapping of waves against the hull a rhythm he had known his entire life. For a while, everything was as it should be. The open sea stretched out before him, endless and indifferent, just the way he liked it. But then, something shifted. It was subtle at first, a flicker of movement, a blur of blue near the fish hold, a trick of the morning light, perhaps, or just his aging eyes playing games with him. He frowned, gripping the wheel tighter. Then he saw it again. A shadow. Small. Human. Tom's heart skipped a beat. "What the hell?" he muttered, cutting the engine. The sudden silence made the moment feel heavier. The only sound the gentle rocking of the boat. Moving cautiously, he stepped away from the helm, his boots creaking against the worn wooden deck. His instincts screamed at him to be careful. This was not normal. Slowly, he approached the fish hold, every muscle in his body tensing as he reached for the latch. He hesitated. Then, with a deep breath, he swung it open. A pair of wide, terrified eyes stared back at him. A child, no older than 6 or 7, huddled in the corner, trembling violently. He was wearing an oversized life vest, one far too large for his small frame. The vest was pristine, dry, which meant the boy hadn't come from the water. His dark, unkempt hair clung to his forehead, and his skin was marked with dirt and bruises. But it was his eyes that held Tom's attention. Deep pools of fear, darting around as though expecting something or someone to appear. Tom felt an unexpected pang in his chest. He had seen fear before. Real, raw fear, but never in a child this young. The boy shrank back, pressing himself against the wooden interior of the fish hold, as if trying to disappear. "Please," the child whispered in broken, accented English. "No hurt. Please." Tom exhaled sharply, rubbing his rough, calloused fingers over his graying beard. "Now hold on there, kid. I ain't gonna hurt ya." His voice, though rough, softened slightly. He crouched down, careful not to startle the boy further. "But you gotta tell me, how the hell did you get on my boat?" The child's lower lip trembled, and he shook his head violently. He wasn't just scared, he was terrified. Tom's gaze flickered downward, and that's when he saw it. Strapped tightly around the boy's small ankle was a device, a thick black band with a blinking red light. Something in Tom's gut twisted. "What's that on your leg, kid?" he asked, pointing at the device. The boy hesitated, then slowly reached down, his small fingers brushing over it. "Swim thing," he mumbled uncertainly. "Swim thing." Tom's brow furrowed. That wasn't like any swimming tracker he'd ever seen. No, this was something else entirely. He clenched his jaw, his mind racing. Had the kid been abandoned? Was he lost? But then, why the tracker? Why the overwhelming fear? He needed answers. Tom sighed, standing up and running a hand through his thinning gray hair. All right, listen, kid. I don't know what kind of trouble you're in, but I can't just keep you on my boat. When we get back to the dock, we'll find your folks. The moment the words left his mouth, the boy's eyes widened in sheer terror. He shook his head frantically. No, no, Doc. His tiny hands clutched at Tom's sleeve in desperation. Please. Bad men. No, Doc. Tom stilled. Bad men. The words sent a chill down his spine. He had heard enough stories from the other fishermen. About smuggling, about desperate people fleeing impossible situations, about predators who waited in the shadows, preying on the vulnerable. He looked back at the boy, really looked at him. Small, fragile, alone, hunted. Tom exhaled slowly, weighing his options. He was an old man, set in his ways, and the last thing he wanted was to get involved in something way over his head. But he wasn't heartless. He scratched his beard, making up his mind. All right, kid. You can stay on the boat. For now. But you gotta tell me the truth. Who are you? Where are your parents? The boy hesitated, eyes flickering with something like grief. Name, Miguel, he whispered. Miguel. Tom nodded. All right, Miguel. We'll figure this out. The boy nodded hesitantly, but there was still fear in his eyes. He didn't trust Tom yet. Not fully. And Tom couldn't blame him. As he turned back toward the helm, something in the distance caught his eye. A boat. Not just any boat. A sleek, black speedboat, cutting through the water like a predator. Tom's stomach dropped. Whoever they weren't here for fishing. And they were heading straight for him. Shadows on the water. Tom's hands tightened around the worn wooden wheel of the Lucky Catch as he watched the sleek black speedboat in the distance. His mind worked fast, piecing together the situation. A terrified child, a tracking device, and now a boat that didn't belong in these waters. He knew trouble when he saw it. Instinct screamed at him to run. But the sea didn't allow running. Out here, you had to be smarter, faster, and just as ruthless as the tide. Tom's breath was steady as he turned to Miguel, who was still curled up in the fish hold. The boy's eyes followed him, wide and uncertain. All right, kid, Tom muttered, his voice firm but not unkind. You see that boat out there? Miguel nodded slowly, his little body shivering despite the warmth of the morning air. They coming for you? Tom asked, already knowing the answer. Miguel didn't speak, but his tiny hands clutched at the railing of the fish hold, his knuckles turning white. That was answer enough. Tom let out a slow breath, his heart beating like a war drum. He had spent decades reading the water, but people were harder to read. What he did know was that no one came out here that early in a boat like that unless they were looking for trouble. He had two choices: turn the boat around, head back to the dock, and hope these men didn't follow. Keep moving into open water, away from everything familiar, risking the unknown. Neither option was ideal, but only one of them gave Miguel a chance. Tom chose the sea. The chase begins. He gritted his teeth and shoved the throttle forward, pushing the Lucky Catch past its normal speed. The old boat groaned in protest, but she responded, cutting through the waves with everything she had left to give. Miguel let out a small gasp as the boat lurched forward, his tiny hands gripping the railing tighter. Hang on, kid, Tom warned. The roar of the Lucky Catch was soon joined by the distant hum of the speedboat's engine, closing in fast. Tom flicked his gaze toward the water, searching for a way out of this mess. The gulf was vast, but it offered no cover, no rocks, no hidden inlets. Nothing but open water. Damn, he muttered. The black speedboat cut through the waves with terrifying efficiency, its powerful engine far outclassing his own. Tom knew he couldn't outrun them, but he could outthink them. His eyes darted to the fish crates piled near the stern of the boat. Heavy, wooden crates filled with ice. Extra weight. With a grunt, he lunged forward, yanking one loose and heaving it overboard. The crate splashed down, disappearing into the rolling waves. Then another, and another. The Lucky Catch surged forward as the weight lessened, gaining a brief burst of speed. Tom didn't look back. He just listened. The sudden shift in the water told him what he needed to know. The speedboat had to slow down, maneuvering around the floating obstacles. It wasn't much, but it bought him time. Tom pressed forward, eyes locked on the horizon. But then, a gunshot. The sharp crack of a bullet sliced through the early morning air. Tom ducked instinctively, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. A second shot rang out, this time punching a hole through one of the empty crates still on deck. Miguel screamed, curling into himself. Tom's blood ran cold. They weren't trying to scare him. They were trying to sink him. Nowhere to run. The next shot shattered the glass of the cabin window, sending shards across the deck. Tom gritted his teeth. He had seen men killed on the water before, had dragged up bodies caught in nets, victims of their own misfortune. But this was murder. And Miguel was their target. His mind raced. If he kept running, they'd sink him. If he stopped, they'd take Miguel. There was only one move left. A fisherman's trick. Tom grabbed the steering wheel and yanked it hard to the left. The boat lurched sideways, cutting against the waves at a sharp angle. The sudden maneuver threw Miguel to the deck, and Tom had to plant his boots firmly to keep from falling himself. The sea roared around them, whitecaps foaming as the boat rocked violently. Behind them, the speedboat wasn't so lucky. Tom had spent a lifetime reading the ocean. These men hadn't. Their speedboat, built for raw power but not for sudden shifts, hit the wake of the Lucky Catch at a dangerous angle. For a moment, it seemed to lift out of the water. Then, crash. The nose of the speedboat slammed down, sending up a violent spray of seawater. Tom heard the men shouting, scrambling to recover. It wouldn't stop them forever, but it gave him another chance. He turned to Miguel, whose face was pale with fear. "You all right, kid?" Miguel gave a shaky nod, his hands gripping the deck. Tom exhaled. "Good, 'cause we ain't done yet." The calm before the storm. For now, the speedboat had lost some distance, but it wouldn't last. Tom needed to think fast. He glanced down at Miguel's ankle, at the tracker. That thing was leading the men straight to them. It had to come off. He knelt beside Miguel and pulled out his rusted fishing knife. The blade was old, dull in places, but sharp where it mattered. "Hold still," Tom instructed, gripping Miguel's leg. The boy whimpered but nodded. Tom set the blade against the thick band of the tracker. It was stronger than he expected, too thick for the knife alone. He needed something stronger. His eyes darted around the deck, landing on the bolt cutters. Grabbing them, he positioned the tool around the band and squeezed with all his strength. For a moment, nothing. Then, snap. The tracker broke apart, falling to the deck with a dull clatter. Tom wasted no time. He grabbed the device and hurled it into the sea, watching as it disappeared beneath the waves. Miguel exhaled sharply, as if shedding the weight of his own fear. Tom gave him a firm nod. That should throw him off for a bit. But deep down, he knew better. They weren't out of danger yet. The next move. Tom gripped the wheel again, eyes scanning the horizon. He had to make a choice. Head for shore, risk running into the men at the docks. Go deeper into open water, pray the police found them before the killers did. Both options were deadly. But then, Tom's eyes caught something. A cargo ship in the distance, slowly making its way across the horizon. An idea struck him. It was reckless, dangerous, possibly suicidal. But it was also their only shot. He turned to Miguel, his jaw set. "Hold on tight, kid." He spun the wheel hard, steering the Lucky Catch toward the massive ship. The speedboat was recovering fast, coming up behind them once more. But Tom wasn't going to fight them on the open sea. He was going to disappear. As the massive cargo ship loomed closer, Tom took a deep breath, steadying his grip. If they timed it just right, they might just make it. The escape gamble. The massive cargo ship loomed ahead like a floating city, its steel hull cutting through the sea like a giant oblivious to the world below. Towering containers stacked high on its deck cast long shadows across the water, making it an imposing, moving fortress. A perfect hiding place, if they could get close enough. Tom Calloway gritted his teeth, his hands white-knuckled around the wheel of the Lucky Catch. His pulse hammered like the relentless tide, but his mind remained sharp. The speedboat behind them had recovered, and the men were closing in fast. They had guns. Tom had an old fishing boat, but he also had the ocean and a lifetime of knowing how to use it. Behind him, Miguel huddled near the deck, eyes locked on the dark waters. He was terrified, but trying not to show it. Tom had to respect the kid for that. "Hang on, boy," Tom muttered. "We're not done yet." A dangerous bet. The cargo ship's sheer size was staggering. It moved slowly, its massive hull cutting through the waves at a steady pace, heading further into the Gulf of Mexico. It would be at least another 20 minutes before it reached open waters, where it would disappear beyond any hope of help. They had one shot to get on board. Tom glanced back. The speedboat was just yards away now, gaining on them. He could see the men clearly. The one with the gun stood at the bow, feet planted wide, taking aim. Tom jerked the wheel hard to the right. A bullet zipped past his ear, slamming into the mast with a loud crack. Another splintered the wooden deck near Miguel's feet. "Damn it," Tom cursed. He yanked the throttle forward, pushing the Lucky Catch toward the cargo ship's side. They weren't going to outrun them, but if they could get close enough. The cargo ship's wake churned the sea into a frothy mess, making it dangerous for a smaller boat to approach. But Tom had done dangerous things his whole life. He maneuvered the boat alongside the towering metal hull, bringing it dangerously close. Miguel's eyes darted up. We climb." Tom nodded. "It's the only way." The ship's hull had a ladder. A rusted, weather-beaten emergency ladder hanging just above the waterline, meant for maintenance crews. If they could grab it, they had a chance. One chance. Miguel hesitated. I'm scared." Tom didn't blame him. The ship was massive, and climbing a swaying ladder with men shooting at them was the definition of insanity. But the alternative? Death. Tom knelt beside Miguel, gripping the boy's small shoulders. "Listen to me, son. You're scared. That's good. It means you're alive. But if we don't move now, you won't be scared for long. Understand?" Miguel swallowed, eyes brimming with fear, but nodded. Tom didn't waste another second. "Go. Climb fast as you can." The climb. Miguel scrambled onto the railing of the Lucky Catch, reaching for the lowest rung of the cargo ship's ladder. His fingers barely brushed it. Tom gritted his teeth. "Jump, kid." With a small cry, Miguel leaped and caught the rung. Tom felt a surge of relief as the boy clung to the rusted metal, arms trembling. But then, the speedboat rammed into them. The impact sent the Lucky Catch rocking violently. Tom lost his balance, crashing against the deck. A sharp pain shot through his ribs. Miguel screamed. Tom's head snapped up. The boy was dangling from the ladder, feet kicking, struggling to climb. The speedboat's driver grinned. "You're done, old man," one of them yelled. Another gunshot rang out. The bullet hit the hull of the cargo ship, inches from Miguel's hand. Tom's chest tightened. They were going to shoot him. His instincts took over. Ignoring the pain in his ribs, he lunged toward the ladder. One hand caught the rung, then the other. With a groan of effort, Tom hauled himself up. Another shot. This time, the bullet grazed his leg. Tom gritted his teeth, climbing through the pain. Miguel was above him now, scrambling higher, faster. They were almost there. Then, a massive horn bellowed from above. The cargo ship fights back. The cargo ship's crew had seen them. More importantly, they saw the men in the speedboat. A loudspeaker crackled to life in a burst of Spanish and English. "Detengens, this is a restricted vessel. Turn back now, or you will be fired upon." Tom almost laughed. The men in the speedboat froze. A spotlight from the cargo ship blazed to life, locking onto them. The speedboat's driver cursed loudly, slamming the throttle into reverse. The black boat peeled away, vanishing into the darkness as the cargo ship's crew shouted warnings. Tom didn't wait to see what happened next. He kept climbing, forcing his tired body up rung after rung until finally he reached the deck. Miguel collapsed beside him, panting. They were safe. For now. A hard landing. The cargo ship's crew surrounded them fast. Men in blue uniforms, their faces hardened with suspicion. A man in a captain's uniform stepped forward. "You want to tell me why the hell I just had to chase off armed men from my ship?" Tom exhaled, his ribs aching, the adrenaline leaving him weak. He pointed at Miguel. "This kid," he said between breaths. "They were trying to kill him." The captain's gaze narrowed. His eyes flicked to the boy, then back to Tom. Tom saw something shift in the man's expression. Understanding. Anger. "This child," the captain murmured, his voice suddenly grim. "Where did he come from?" Miguel, still breathless, finally spoke. His voice was small. "Cuba," he whispered. The crew went silent. Tom's gut tightened. Something about that word made them all tense. One of the crewmen crossed himself. The captain's face darkened. He let out a slow breath, then turned sharply to his men. "Get them below deck. Now." Tom felt the shift in the air. This wasn't over. Not even close. As he was led below deck, he knew one thing for certain. Whatever Miguel had escaped from, it was bigger than he had imagined. And now, they were both caught in it. The captain's secret. The air inside the cargo ship's lower deck was thick with the scent of salt, rust, and oil. It was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from the flickering overhead bulbs casting eerie shadows across the steel walls. Tom Calloway sat on an old wooden crate, his breathing heavy, the ache in his ribs growing worse by the minute. He flexed his fingers, trying to shake off the cold sweat clinging to his skin. Miguel sat beside him, curled into himself, his small body trembling despite the humid heat. The ship's crew had brought them below deck without a word, locking the heavy metal door behind them. They hadn't been rough, but the message was clear: you aren't free to leave. Tom glanced at Miguel, his brows furrowing. The boy hadn't said a word since they were taken inside. He just stared at the floor, his fingers clenching and unclenching. "Kid," Tom murmured. Miguel flinched. Tom sighed, lowering his voice. "We're all right for now. They didn't toss us overboard. That's a good sign." Miguel didn't respond. He just pressed his knees tighter to his chest. Tom leaned his head back against the cold metal wall, exhaling slowly. This was all wrong. The way the crew had reacted. The way the captain had stiffened when Miguel said he was from Cuba. The way they had locked them below deck without asking more questions. Something about this ship, these people, felt off. And Tom was going to figure out what. A prison at sea. Minutes stretched into an hour. The only sound was the low hum of the ship's engine beneath them, vibrating through the metal walls. Tom's fingers tapped against his knee, his patience wearing thin. He had spent a lifetime at sea, but he had never felt this trapped before. Finally, the door groaned open. Tom sat up straight, his old muscles tensing. Miguel shrank back as a tall figure stepped into the room. The captain. He was a broad-shouldered man, his navy uniform unbuttoned at the collar, revealing a chest crisscrossed with faded scars. His weathered face held the hardened expression of someone who had seen too much. Tom knew the type. This was a man who had survived things most wouldn't. The captain's dark eyes flickered between them before he stepped further into the room, letting the door close behind him with a thud. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice deep, tinged with a Cuban accent. Tom didn't answer immediately. He just studied the man. Finally, he spoke. "Thomas Calloway," he said slowly. "Old fisherman. Stumbled into some trouble I wasn't looking for." The captain's gaze shifted to Miguel. "And the boy?" Tom's jaw tightened. "Miguel." Miguel didn't lift his head. The captain exhaled through his nose. "You shouldn't be here." Tom narrowed his eyes. "No kidding. But here we are. So, how about you tell me why you locked us up?" The captain crossed his arms, his silence heavier than the ship itself. Then, finally, "You have no idea what you've stepped into, do you?" Tom's patience snapped. He shoved himself to his feet, ignoring the pain in his ribs. "Why don't you stop with the riddles and tell me what the hell is going on?" The captain regarded him for a long moment. Then he turned toward the door. "Come with me," he said. Tom hesitated. The captain's dark eyes locked onto his. "I give you my word, I'm not handing you over to those men." That was enough. For now. Tom placed a hand on Miguel's shoulder. "Come on, kid." Miguel hesitated but followed. They stepped into the dim hallway, the heavy door clanking shut behind them. The ghost ship's truth. The captain led them through a maze of narrow corridors, past rusted bulkheads and silent crew members who averted their gazes. Tom's gut twisted. Why did they all look so damn afraid? They finally stopped in front of another heavy door. The captain unlocked it and gestured inside. Tom stepped through first, and his breath caught. The room was lined with beds, each one occupied by people. Women, children, a few older men. All of them huddled together, their faces hollow with exhaustion. Miguel stiffened beside Tom. His little hands gripped Tom's sleeve. The captain shut the door behind them. "This is what you ran into, fisherman." Tom's throat went dry. Refugees. There had to be at least 50 of them. Some were wrapped in old blankets. Others clutched crying children. A woman sat at the far end of the room, staring at the floor like she had no soul left. Tom turned to the captain, his voice low. "You're smuggling them." The captain's jaw tightened. "Saving them." Tom's breath came slow and controlled. He ran a hand over his weathered face. This was bigger than he thought. Much bigger. The captain moved toward one of the bunks, kneeling beside a thin man clutching his ribs. The man looked injured. His shirt was soaked with blood. "This is Miguel's father," the captain said. Miguel sucked in a breath. Tom's stomach dropped. The man groaned, his eyes barely opening. But when they did, they locked onto Miguel. His lips parted. "Mio," he rasped. Miguel choked on a sob. He rushed forward, gripping his father's arm. "Papa." The man winced but pulled Miguel against him. Tom watched, his throat tight. The captain exhaled. "We found him floating on wreckage 2 nights ago. The men who attacked your boat. They've been hunting him, looking for Miguel." Tom rubbed his temple. "Why?" The captain hesitated then. "Because his father stole something from them." Tom's pulse pounded. "What?" The captain's eyes darkened. "A list." Tom's blood ran cold. "A list of what?" The captain sighed. "A list of names. Children, women, people those men have taken." Tom felt the weight of it hit his chest. Miguel's father had stolen proof of the worst kind of crime. And now every smuggler, trafficker, and killer in the Gulf wanted it back. "Where's the list now?" Tom asked. The captain's expression turned grim. "We don't know." Tom let out a slow breath. "So what happens now?" The captain glanced at Miguel, then back to Tom. "Now, we find out how far these men are willing to go to silence that boy's father." Tom set his jaw. Something told him they wouldn't have to wait long. Because somewhere out there, the killers weren't done hunting. And they were getting closer. The attack at sea. The cargo ship rocked gently beneath them, a steady rhythm of steel and water that should have been comforting. But inside the dimly lit crew quarters, the air was thick with something else. Tension. Fear. The kind of silence that only comes before a storm. Tom Calloway had spent his entire life at sea, but he had never been in a situation like this. Miguel sat beside his injured father, holding onto the man's weak hand as if afraid to let go. The boy's small fingers trembled, his dark eyes filled with the hope of a child who had just found what he thought he lost forever. The captain, Rafael Ortega, stood near the door, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Tom exhaled through his nose, rubbing his calloused fingers over his beard. "So," he muttered, "you're telling me a gang of human traffickers is hunting this boy because his father stole a list of their victims." Raphael nodded, his eyes heavy. Sigh. "We know the list is real, but we don't know where it is now." Tom let that sink in. Somewhere there was a piece of paper, or a USB drive, or a notebook, or something that contained proof of one of the biggest crimes on these waters. Names. Faces. The people these bastards had stolen. Miguel's father, Daniel Rice, had stolen it from them. And now, they wanted him dead. Tom clenched his fists. "And you didn't think to tell me this before I nearly got my damn head blown off." The captain gave him a flat look. "Would you have believed me?" Tom's jaw tightened. No, probably not. But that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that the people who wanted Miguel dead weren't finished. And they were coming. The storm breaks. A voice crackled over the intercom. "Captain, you need to get to the bridge. Now." Raphael stiffened. Tom's stomach dropped. He knew that tone. The tone of a man trying to sound calm when he already knows he's in trouble. Raphael turned sharply, throwing the door open and storming toward the bridge. Tom followed without hesitation. Miguel hesitated. Then he hurried after Tom, clutching at his coat. The old fisherman didn't stop him. If trouble was coming, they might as well face it together. The enemy arrives. The bridge of the cargo ship was small but functional, lined with outdated equipment, scratched radar screens, and weary crew members with fear in their eyes. Tom didn't need to ask why. He could see it. Through the wide glass windows, a ship was approaching. Not just any ship, a war machine. It was smaller than the cargo ship, but built for speed. A repurposed military vessel, painted black, its hull lined with heavy-duty weapons. It cut through the water with the hunger of a predator. Miguel gasped. Tom's chest tightened. This wasn't just another smuggler boat. This was a kill squad. One of Raphael's men muttered something in Spanish. Tom didn't need a translation to know it wasn't good. Raphael's voice was tight. "They aren't here to talk." Tom exhaled. No kidding. The black ship was closing in fast. Too fast. And the lucky catch was back on the cargo ship's lower deck. They had no way to run. Tom glanced at Raphael. "You got any weapons on this ship?" Raphael's jaw clenched. "This is a civilian vessel, Calloway." Tom scowled. That meant no. His mind worked fast. "Then we need a plan. Fast." Fire on the water. A voice barked over the ship's loudspeaker. A warning. It was spoken in Spanish first, then English. "You have something that belongs to us. Turn it over now, and no one has to die." Tom's blood ran cold. Miguel stiffened beside him. Raphael's knuckles were white against the controls. "They want Daniel." Tom's breath came slow, measured. "Well, they're not getting him." The radio crackled again. "You have 60 seconds to comply." Tom's heart hammered. Then, boom. A warning shot. The black ship fired at them. A cannon blast sending water spraying against the cargo ship's side. Miguel cried out, covering his ears. Raphael turned to his crew. "We need to move. Now." The ship's engines roared to life. Tom grabbed Miguel's hand and ran. The fight for survival. Chaos exploded across the ship. The black vessel closed in, its men preparing to board. Raphael shouted orders. His crew scrambled, desperate to fight with what little they had. Tom pulled Miguel behind a stack of shipping containers, his mind racing. No weapons, no escape, no time. His eyes locked onto a nearby fuel drum. Then he spotted a flare gun in an emergency case on the wall. His gut told him what to do. It was crazy, reckless, exactly what they needed. Tom grabbed the flare gun. Miguel's eyes widened. What? Tom didn't wait. He aimed at the fuel drum and fired. Hell breaks loose. The flare hit the metal drum. A second of silence. Then, boom! A fireball erupted, blasting one of the shipping containers off its hinges. The explosion sent a wave of heat and force across the deck. Tom threw himself over Miguel, shielding the boy. Raphael's men scattered. The explosion rocked the ship, sending flames licking at the metal. And then, gunfire. The black ship's crew opened fire, pissed as hell. But the explosion had done its job. The cargo ship had enough time to turn. The black ship's angle was off. They couldn't board as easily anymore. Tom grabbed Miguel, pulling him toward the lifeboats. "We're leaving," he growled. Miguel stared at him. "But." "No buts, kid." Tom's voice was fierce. "This isn't over. We need to get out of here while we can." Miguel swallowed, nodded. Raphael appeared beside them, his face grim. "You're going back to land." Tom nodded. "I don't have a choice." Raphael's eyes darkened. "Neither do we." The captain turned to his men, barking orders. The crew rushed to steer the cargo ship deeper into the sea. Tom and Miguel climbed into the lifeboat. As the black ship regrouped, readying for another attack, Tom cut the line. The lifeboat plunged into the waves. The seas swallowed them whole. Tom grabbed the oars, pulling them away from the battle. Miguel looked up at him. "Where are we going?" the boy asked. Tom's jaw tightened. "Somewhere they can't find us." The final stand. The lifeboat rocked violently as it plunged into the rolling waters of the Gulf. The salty spray stung Tom Calloway's weathered face, his hands gripping the oars so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Miguel huddled in the bow, his small hands clutching the sides, his wide eyes darting between Tom and the chaos unfolding behind them. Above them, the cargo ship burned. Orange flames licked the sky, consuming part of the deck where the fuel drum had exploded. Even from a distance, Tom could hear the metal groaning, the ship's hull fighting against the heat. Beyond it, the black ship was regrouping. Tom's gut twisted. They weren't done. The men on the smuggler's ship had one goal: kill Miguel. Tom rowed harder, his aging muscles screaming in protest. The lifeboat was small, barely big enough for two people, but it cut through the waves with surprising speed. The problem was, it wasn't fast enough. Miguel turned his face toward him, voice barely audible over the roaring sea. "Where do we go?" Tom didn't stop rowing. He locked his gaze on the horizon, scanning for anything that could offer them a way out. Land. Another boat. Something. Nothing. Just open water. His jaw tightened. He had spent his whole life on the sea. If this was where it ended, at least it was fitting. But Miguel was just a kid, and Tom had one job left to do: keep him alive. Nowhere left to run. Behind them, the black ship surged forward. The smugglers had abandoned any pretense of patience. The explosion had infuriated them. They were coming now with full force. Tom cursed under his breath, his grip on the oars tightening. Then, gunfire. A bullet ripped into the water beside them, sending up a small geyser of foam. Another whizzed past Miguel's head. Miguel yelped, ducking low. Tom gritted his teeth. He yanked one oar harder than the other, jerking the boat into an erratic zigzag pattern. If he could keep moving unpredictably, they'd have a harder time aiming. Bang! The bullet slammed into the side of the lifeboat. Tom felt the boat lurch. His stomach dropped. They were taking on water. Miguel gasped. Tom. The older man's heart pounded. He had seen too many men drown out here. He refused to let this kid be one of them. A desperate plan. Tom's mind worked fast. Rowing wasn't going to save them. They needed a new plan. His old fisherman's instincts took over. The boat was sinking, but not immediately. They had minutes, not seconds. The smugglers would want proof that Miguel was dead, which meant, if they thought the job was done, they'd leave. That was the key. He turned to Miguel, his voice low and urgent. Kid, listen to me. We're going in the water. Miguel's eyes widened in panic. No, I can't. Tom gripped his shoulders. You can, boy. And you will. It's the only way. Miguel shook his head violently. They'll see us. Tom glanced at the sinking lifeboat, then back at the smuggler's ship, which was closing in. A plan formed. He grabbed Miguel's arm. We don't swim away. Miguel blinked. What? Tom exhaled. We go under. We let the boat sink. They see an empty boat. They assume we're dead. Miguel stared. He was terrified. Tom squeezed his arm gently. I won't let you drown, son. I swear it. Miguel hesitated. Then he nodded. Tom gave him a grim smile. That's a good boy. Into the depths. Another bullet slammed into the boat. Tom knew they were out of time. He grabbed Miguel tightly. Deep breath, kid. Now. Miguel sucked in a shaky breath. And then, Tom tipped the boat. The cold ocean swallowed them. Silence beneath the waves. The sea engulfed them, a crushing world of darkness and pressure. Tom held onto Miguel, pulling him downward. He kicked hard, moving them beneath the wreckage of the lifeboat. Above them, bullets sliced through the water, but the smugglers couldn't see them in the swirling debris. Tom's lungs burned. Miguel clung to him, shaking. They stayed beneath the water as long as they could, waiting for the smugglers to give up. The gamble pays off. After what felt like an eternity, Tom risked a glance upward. Through the murky blue, he saw it. The black ship was turning away, leaving. The smugglers had taken the bait. They thought Miguel was dead. Tom's chest ached for air. He kicked hard, dragging them both toward the surface. Breaking the surface, Tom and Miguel exploded from the water, gasping, coughing. Miguel clung to him, shaking. Tom pulled the boy close, his chest heaving. They had survived. For now. But they were still alone, miles from land. Tom forced his breathing to slow. We made it, kid. Miguel shivered. Now what? Tom looked at the horizon. The sun was beginning to rise. And in the distance, a Coast Guard ship. Hope. He set his jaw. Now we go home. Epilogue. A new beginning. The Coast Guard pulled them aboard hours later. Tom was half conscious, his old body failing him after the ordeal. But the moment he saw Miguel safe in a blanket, he smiled. The traffickers were gone. Miguel was alive. And Tom Calloway, he had one last fight left in him. As the Coast Guard officers took their statements, Tom pulled Miguel close. You got a family, kid? He asked softly. Miguel hesitated, then shook his head. Tom nodded. You do now. Miguel's eyes welled up. And for the first time since this nightmare began, he smiled. The Coast Guard ship cut through the waves, its engine humming like a promise of salvation. Tom Calloway barely held onto consciousness, his body trembling from exhaustion, his old bones aching like they had been through a storm, because they had. Miguel sat beside him, wrapped in a thick gray blanket, his wet clothes clinging to his small frame. His little hands were locked tightly around Tom's, as if afraid that if he let go, Tom would disappear. You're okay now, kid, Tom muttered, his voice rough like sandpaper. Miguel didn't answer. He just squeezed Tom's hand harder. The Coast Guard officers moved quickly, professional and efficient. A medic checked Tom's vitals, clicking his tongue at the bruises along his ribs, the gash on his leg from the bullet graze. "You should be dead," the young officer muttered, shaking his head. Tom let out a dry chuckle. "Ain't my time yet." But deep down, he wasn't so sure. Safe, but not done. The smuggler's ship was gone, vanished into the vast gulf, slipping back into the underworld of human trafficking and black market crimes. The bastards had been smart. The moment they thought Miguel was dead, they cut their losses and disappeared. But Tom knew better. They weren't done. Because the list was still out there. The names, the evidence, the proof. And Miguel's father, Daniel Rice, had it. A hard truth. Hours later, Tom and Miguel sat in a military tent at the Coast Guard station in Key West. Miguel had finally fallen asleep, curled up in a chair beside Tom, his tiny chest rising and falling steadily. Tom watched him, exhaustion heavy in his bones. Then, footsteps. Tom looked up as Captain Rafael Ortega stepped inside the tent, his uniform stiff with dried seawater, his face carved from stone. "You made it," Tom said hoarsely. Rafael nodded. "And so did you." Tom gestured at the chair across from him. "Tell me the truth, Captain. What happens now?" Rafael's expression darkened. "The list. It's still out there. Your boy's father stole it from the traffickers. But we don't know where he hid it." Tom frowned. "He never told you." Rafael hesitated. Then, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small battered notebook. Tom's pulse kicked up. "We found this in his belongings," Rafael said quietly. He set it on the table. Tom grabbed it, flipping through the pages. Then, his breath caught. Inside the notebook, hastily written in the margin, was a set of coordinates. Miguel's father had hidden the list somewhere, and he had left the location for his son. Tom's jaw clenched. "You know what this means." Rafael nodded grimly. "The traffickers will come back for it. And for him." Tom's stomach twisted. Miguel had lost everything. His father was dead. And now, these monsters would keep hunting him, hunting the proof that could destroy them. Tom exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. He had been an old fisherman yesterday, a man just trying to live out his last years in peace. Now he was in the middle of something much bigger, something he couldn't walk away from. He looked down at the sleeping boy beside him. Miguel had lost everything. But he wasn't alone. Not anymore. The end. But not really. Tom picked up the notebook. His old hands were steady. He wasn't a cop. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't some Dan hero. But he was a fisherman. And when a fisherman hooked something big, he didn't let go. He fought. For the first time in years, Tom felt alive. He looked at Rafael. "So, we going to find this list?" Rafael gave him a slow smile. "Damn right we are." And just like that, the old fisherman set course for one last fight. For Miguel. For the lost. For justice.